Sometimes the most terrifying moments begin with something incredibly simple, like a knock on the door. But when you live miles away from anyone, surrounded by endless farmland and silence, a knock in the middle of the night can feel deeply unsettling. My name is Daniel, and my wife Cheryl and I own a small farm near Buckingham, Iowa. Most of our lives have been spent working the land and growing corn. Farming isn't just our job. It's the only life we've ever known. Out here, life moves slowly and quietly. The closest people to us are our neighbors George and Kenny, and even they live about half a mile away in opposite directions. They're farmers too, and in places like this, neighbors often become your closest friends because there simply aren't many other people around. One rainy weekend night in August of 2018, George and his wife came over to spend some time with us. The evening was simple and relaxed. We played board games, shared a few drinks, and laughed more than we probably should have. As the hours passed, the rain continued tapping softly against the windows, and the bottles on the table slowly emptied. By the time the clock reached around 11 p.m., everyone was feeling a little tipsy. Eventually, George and his wife decided to head back home, which was luckily just a short 30-second drive down the road. After they left, Cheryl and I stayed on the couch and turned on one of our favorite movies. We poured ourselves another small glass of wine and settled under a blanket, the warm glow of the TV filling the room while the quiet rain continued outside. We were starting to feel tired, almost drifting off right there on the couch, when suddenly the peaceful silence was broken by a sharp sound coming from the front of the house. Someone was knocking on the door. Instantly, both of us sat up. A knock at our door this late at night was something that simply never happened out here. For a moment, we thought maybe we imagined it. But then we heard it again, faint, but clear enough to make our hearts start beating a little faster. I quickly grabbed the remote and lowered the TV volume. The house went quiet as we listened carefully. About 20 seconds later, the knocking returned, a little louder this time. And then through the door, we heard a muffled voice call out softly, "We need help." I started to get up from the couch, thinking someone might actually need assistance. But before I could take another step, Cheryl suddenly grabbed my arm. I turned to look at her, and the expression on her face immediately made me hesitate. She looked uneasy, almost scared. Without saying a word, she slowly shook her head, silently telling me not to open the door. I leaned closer to her and whispered, trying to reassure her that everything would be fine. "Don't worry," I said quietly. "I'm not going to open it yet. I'll just ask who it is." Cheryl whispered that maybe we shouldn't respond at all. She thought it would be better if whoever was outside didn't realize we were home. But honestly, the lights were on and the TV had been playing. It was very likely they already knew someone was inside. I slowly walked toward the front door and called out, asking who it was. A man's voice from the other side immediately replied, sounding almost relieved. "Oh, thank God, could you open up? We're lost." I frowned and asked, "Who's we?" The voice answered, "My wife and I." Something about the situation didn't sit right with me, so I replied, "All right, can your wife say something?" For a few seconds, there was complete silence on the other side of the door. I waited, expecting another voice, but nothing came. After a moment, I spoke again. "Did you hear me?" The same voice responded, "Yeah, but she's not next to me right now." That was the moment my instincts started screaming that something wasn't right. The man's voice sounded strange, almost like someone trying to raise the pitch of his voice on purpose. It reminded me of someone pretending, trying to lighten the tension. I chuckled and said, "George, is that you?" Our neighbor George was known for being a bit of a goof, and considering we had all been drinking earlier, it wouldn't have been impossible for him to try some kind of dumb prank. From the other side of the door, the voice replied again, this time slightly deeper. "Yeah." For a moment, I felt a wave of relief. I almost believed it really was George messing around. Still, something in my gut told me not to open that door yet. Out here in the countryside, someone knocking late at night, claiming to be lost, just doesn't happen. It's the kind of thing that instantly puts you on edge. So I decided to test him. Through the door, I said, "All right then, prove it. What's your wife's name?" Instead of George's voice answering back, a completely unfamiliar voice responded. "That's a trick question." The smile on my face disappeared instantly. I stepped away from the door and grabbed my phone to call George. Cheryl had been watching the whole thing unfold and kept whispering that we should just call the police. Hold on, I told her. The phone rang 3 times before George picked up. Hey, I said quickly, are you standing at my front door right now? There was a pause before he answered, confused. No, why? My stomach dropped. There's someone outside our house trying to trick me into opening the door. I told him. George didn't hesitate. He said he'd get in his truck and come over immediately. Then we hung up. Keep in mind, all of us were still a little drunk from earlier. A few seconds later, the knocking started again. This time I yelled through the door, I've got a shotgun and I'm waiting. If you don't leave right now, you're going to regret it. The voice answered calmly. We just need to use a phone. That's all. Meanwhile, Cheryl had already called 911. Out here in the countryside, though, police response can take quite a while. Then we heard footsteps. Not just one set, but multiple. They moved slowly across the wooden deck that wrapped around the house. A moment later, the footsteps stopped near one of our windows. The blinds were closed, but we could clearly hear someone trying to lift the window open. Cheryl, still on the phone with the dispatcher, suddenly screamed, "Leave us alone." Adrenaline kicked in, and I shouted as loud as I could, telling him to get the hell off our property before I started shooting. That's when it finally hit me that my shotgun was upstairs in the closet. I ran for the stairs. Only a few seconds later, we heard pounding on the door again, this time much louder. But this time, the voice yelling from outside was actually George. "Open up, it's me." I rushed downstairs and unlocked the door. George stepped inside holding his shotgun, breathing heavily from the drive over. He told us he hadn't seen anyone or anything when he pulled up. He stayed with us until a police officer finally arrived. The officer walked around the property with us and checked the area, but didn't find anyone. Before leaving, he strongly suggested we install security cameras around the house. Strangely enough, it was something we had never thought about before that night. Even now, thinking back on it still gives me chills, knowing that the only thing separating us from whoever was standing on our deck that night was a thin wooden door. Another strange experience happened later that same summer at my grandparents' farm. It was the summer of 2018, and I was staying there alone for a few nights while my grandparents were away. They were paying me to keep an eye on the farm and make sure everything stayed in order. On the final night, I was sitting in the living room watching TV when I heard a strange rustling sound coming from the cornfield outside. At first, I ignored it. Farms are full of noises at night, and I assumed it was probably just a deer moving through the crops. But then something unusual happened. All of the cows started mooing at the same time. Normally, you might hear one cow every now and then, but when every single cow in the field suddenly starts making noise, something is definitely wrong. Something or someone must have startled them. Since I was the only one at the farm, it was technically my responsibility to check things out. So I walked over to the closet to grab my coat before heading outside. But just as I reached for the door, I heard one of the cows let out a loud, high-pitched scream. I froze in place. My heart started pounding as I stood there in complete silence, realizing that whatever's out there definitely wasn't normal. I quickly realized something was seriously wrong with the cows. The constant noise coming from the barn wasn't normal at all. My heart started racing as I ran upstairs into my grandfather's room. Under his bed, he always kept a few firearms for emergencies. My hands were shaking as I grabbed his hunting rifle and loaded it. The cows outside still wouldn't stop making noise, so I forced myself to step outside and head toward the barn. When I walked inside, everything seemed strangely normal at first. The cows were restless, but nothing appeared out of place. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the stalls was empty. A cow was missing. I clearly remembered seeing it tied up there earlier. It didn't make any sense. Just then I heard a strange, high-pitched sound that sounded like a cow, but it came from the cornfield behind the barn. The sound was unsettling, almost unnatural. I stepped outside again and slowly walked toward the field. As I got closer, I could swear I heard something else. Voices. It sounded like people quietly talking somewhere inside the crops. That was enough for me. My nerves were shot. I raised a rifle and fired 2 warning shots into the air. Immediately, everything went silent. The cows stopped making noise and the voices disappeared. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind brushing through the corn. Then I heard it, footsteps moving through the field. I hesitated at the edge of the crops. Every part of me wanted to run back into the house, but I knew I couldn't just hide while someone was trespassing on the farm. This was exactly why farmers kept guns. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the cornfield. As I moved deeper between the rows, I began hearing more footsteps around me. Not just one set, several. The sound of dry leaves crunching followed me from different directions. My fear kept growing with every step. Then suddenly I froze. Down one of the narrow rows stood a person dressed completely in black, only a few feet away from me. I immediately raised a rifle and shouted at him to leave my property. I wasn't bluffing. I was ready to defend myself if I had to, but the person didn't react. To scare him off, I fired another round into the air. The loud echo rolled across the field, but the figure still didn't move. Then he slowly began walking toward me, his arms slightly lifted, as if he was calmly telling me to lower the gun. I aimed the rifle directly at him again and yelled for him to back away. That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. He wasn't alone. As my eyes adjusted in the darkness, I saw more figures standing between the rows of corn, at least 6 or 7 people, all dressed in dark clothing, and those were just the ones I could see. The man walking toward me got close enough for me to notice something even more disturbing. He and all the others were wearing strange masks that covered their faces. I slowly stepped backward, trying not to panic. For a few seconds, everyone stood there in complete silence. I can't even describe the level of fear I felt in that moment. I was convinced I might not make it out of that field alive. Then suddenly they all started chanting. The sound echoed to the cornfield in a strange rhythm. I couldn't understand the words at all. It sounded like some kind of foreign language. The way they chanted almost sounded like a song. My mind raced with horrible thoughts. I began wondering if they were about to perform some kind of ritual. That was when I decided I wasn't staying there another second. I turned and ran as fast as I could through the rows of corn. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I turned around and fired several shots in their direction. I wasn't aiming at anyone, just trying to scare them away. I heard movement immediately, rustling plants and footsteps running in the opposite direction. I had finally scared them off. I ran back toward the farmhouse as fast as I could. On the way, something on the ground caught my attention. When I looked closer, my stomach twisted in horror. Sitting in the middle of the field was a cow's head placed inside a circle of candles. I felt sick. The moment I reached the house, I ran to the sink and nearly threw up. After that, I grabbed the house phone and called the police. I explained everything as clearly as I could. The operator told me an officer would arrive as soon as possible. Right after hanging up, I called my parents and told them what had happened, begging them to come pick me up. My dad said he would be there within an hour. I spent that time upstairs in my grandfather's room, shaking and crying, waiting for what felt like forever. Finally, I saw the flashing lights of the police car outside. I rushed out to meet the officer, feeling more relieved than I ever had in my life. I told him the entire story. He checked the barn and searched a small part of the cornfield. Eventually, he found the cow's head and immediately called for additional officers, since the situation had now become an active investigation. When my parents arrived, we spoke with the officer about everything that happened. Thankfully, they took me home that night. My grandparents took the incident extremely seriously afterward. They installed security cameras all around the farm. To this day, none of us know who those people were, but it was clear they had been performing some kind of disturbing ritual involving animals. And somehow, I just happened to be the unlucky person home alone the night they chose that farm. My name is Howard. I'm 25 years old, and I live on my family's farm in Arkansas. It's not a huge commercial operation, just a small family property. Whenever my parents travel, I help take care of things around the farm. One day, they plan for me to take over the farm when they get older. I'm the oldest of 3 kids and the only son. But honestly, I'm not sure that's the life I want. I've never really imagined myself staying in rural Arkansas forever, especially after something strange that happened last July. My parents had gone away for a week on a trip, leaving me and my two younger sisters, Crystal and Morgan, to look after the place. There isn't much around our property, just open land and crops stretching in every direction. That kind of privacy can be nice, but sometimes it feels like a little too much. Late one night, we were getting ready for bed. Crystal was in her room, working on her laptop, since she was taking summer college classes online. Morgan and I were sitting in the living room watching some stupid TV show. Suddenly, our two dogs outside started barking wildly in the backyard. It was obvious something had spooked them. My first instinct was to step outside and see what they were barking at. Both dogs were staring toward the cornfield, barking nonstop. I yelled at them to quiet down, and for a moment they did. I walked closer to the edge of the crops and listened carefully. That's when I heard it. A whistling sound coming from inside the cornfield. There was no mistaking it. It sounded exactly like a person whistling. My stomach tightened immediately. This was the first time I had ever dealt with a possible trespasser while my dad wasn't home. I quickly went back inside to grab one of the guns we kept for situations like this. I told my sisters that someone might be outside in the field and that I was going to chase them away. Both of them instantly told me that was a terrible idea. Running into a dark cornfield after someone was basically asking for trouble. When I thought about it, they were right. Instead, I went back outside near the dogs, who had started barking again. I raised a gun and fired a warning shot into the air. The loud bang echoed across the fields, and I shouted as loudly as I could for whoever was out there to get off our property. Feeling a little confident, I went back inside. My sister started laughing at how dramatic I looked, and soon we were all laughing together. But the laughter didn't last long. The dogs suddenly started barking again, this time even more aggressively. I walked back outside, ready to fire another warning shot. But the moment I stepped into the yard, my heart nearly stopped. Standing about 20 feet away, right at the edge of the cornfield, was a man. He was staring directly at me. I shouted, "Hey!" and instantly he turned and ran straight into the corn. I ran forward a few steps and fired another warning shot into the air. Then I stopped beside the dogs. There was absolutely no way I was going into that field after him. Instead, I unclipped the dogs from their chains and brought them inside the house. From there, we just waited, hoping whoever was wouldn't come back.